Welcome to this episode of the Palmetto Guardian. This week's episode, we talk first responders, and we have another story from an individual from 9/11 that will be here to talk with us today. Welcome to this episode. I'm Specialist David Erskine.
Captain Cody Denson.
And today's episode, we continue our special week of podcasts for Remembrance and 9/11. We have Master Sergeant, Air Force Master Sergeant, that will be in here with us a little bit later today, talk about his experiences. And we were able to talk to him a little bit beforehand. And he was already in the military when this happened. He was a medic, and so he was there. He was there when it happened. He was there for the aftermath. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of stuff. I want him to be able to tell him a story, but super interesting story, and I'm super excited for y'all to be able to hear it. But the one thing I really did kind of started thinking about when I was hearing him talk was, you know, we focus a lot on the military and what we've done and everything else, and not to say that anybody's been slighted over the 9/11 event, but, you know, the first responders for that event, I mean,
there's so much that went on.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to even, you know, you always hear the cliche, it's hard to put it into words. But, I mean, for them, it really is. You're talking about stuff was collapsing and rubble. Their own precincts and firehouses were involved in this. I mean, their co-workers, brothers, sisters, I mean.
It was the ultimate chaos.
Yeah.
I mean, and they are the first responders to bad situations, but that was the ultimate, like, bad situation that could have happened. Everything was just out there.
And, you know, something else we always talk about, you know, people's courage or bravery. And, you know, a lot of times we think about things in movies and whatever else. You want to talk about bravery and courage and nothing but adrenaline and throwing your own personal safety to the wind. You go back and look at footage and photos of these firemen and these policemen and these EMTs. Rock was still coming down and they were headed in.
They're just working.
Yeah.
They are getting the job done.
Yeah.
Which is like, just, it blows my mind how, I mean, I would assume I would switch off in the same way and do my job, but just to see other people, not many of them.
It's hard to imagine that situation unless you're in that situation.
Yeah.
And these folks are trained for that. I mean, they're trained to do this, and there was no hesitation. There was nothing. It was boom. And I mean, they were in there, and anybody they could help, save, whatever else, they were doing it, and it sometimes, unfortunately, to the cost of their own life.
I mean, that's such a busy city. To think they were able to mobilize that many first responders and get all the assets and personnel in one location and perform their duties, and like you're saying, you know, sometimes to the worst end, but they got that many people out there and that many people were willing to do it. That's just awe-inspiring. And,
you know, I'm not going to, you know, make any, you know, qualms about it or whatever, but I mean, really, reality of things, you know, all people, for a certain amount, like to fuss about, you know, how things get done, or, you know, we always hear jokes about bureaucracy and red tape and, oh, it takes forever to do this. You want to see a situation where that rule doesn't apply, and you want to see how your civil servants work when it's 100% on. That's it.
Best example.
That was it. Now, you never actually came an EMT, right?
I did the EMT certification course, and then I had other stuff. I had like responsibilities for the military side, so I didn't get to actually certify and become an EMT.
Yeah.
But I did a lot of the training and got to see what the job would be like.
And see, you know, that's that obviously you weren't put into that situation, and you haven't since your training, but you know, you got to see a situation, and if not, but for a moment go, that could have been me. Now, you were too young at that in particular time, but looking back at the situation, you could be, and once again, you don't know you in that situation until you're in that situation. And I mean, I did some medical stuff, and I worked in the medical field, and I've made mention on the show that I did. And there is a little bit of a switch that kicks over, and I've had instances like that where but not to that degree. I'm not even going to put myself in the same league as those individuals. That just wouldn't be fair. I'm just not. But I can slightly relate to but I mean, theirs was just next level. It's just next level.
It is. I mean, again, it was mass chaos. Just, I can't fathom where everything around you is just coming apart.
And the fact that they were effective at it.
Yeah.
I mean,
They saved lives.
they were saving lives. It would have been different if they just all ran at the situation like ants scurrying across the ground. Yeah. Of course, maybe that's not a good example because the ants are fairly organized. Something else that scurries randomly. But, yeah, I mean, they went in there and they were doing it. And, you know, they were pulling out people from, not only were they just pulling out, you know, civilians, which is bad enough as it is, but they were pulling out their coworkers and people they'd worked with years that were caught in the same situation. And you're talking about weeks of this recovery and even longer than that in some instances. And you couldn't get these people to go home.
No, I mean, they didn't want to keep working because they knew there were people that still needed them.
Yeah. And, for people who've never been in that situation, like, oh my God, that's terrible. You know, you're up for 24, 36, 72 hours. You're taking 30-minute naps. You're in there breathing God knows what in the dust. But the thing is and for most EMTs and medics, and I had an uncle that was a fireman, is what's a couple hours of sleep compared to a life?
Yep, and it was running through all of their heads.
Yeah.
I mean, no doubt.
Every time the sweat hits you and you go to take a knee, you go, nah, it's not worth it. Mm-hmm. And for everybody out there that's listening, I mean, you got to put yourself in that situation. Just think of as tired as you've ever been in your life, and you're just like, I'm tired, I'm done for the day. But imagine being in that same situation and going, nah, I'm picking my knee back up. I'm going back in. And that's what these people, at some level, whether it was those exact words, they kept saying to themselves.
Because there had to been some of them, either they had family that they weren't aware of, or where they were, or they had friends or family of friends. Some of them definitely were looking for people that they were trying to find also.
Yeah.
And just to have that in the back of your head the whole time.
Just
keep going to find your friends and family.
Yeah. And it's, there's this piece of rubble that I flip over. What
am I about to see?
Yeah, am I saving a life or am I paying respects? Yeah. And that's, man.
That's a hard thing to think of.
And my uncle, he's passed away several years ago. Funny guy, good guy, fireman. Been a fireman for years here in the Columbia, South Carolina area. And I remember talking with him, and he was like, we see it all. He's like, we're there. He's like, if there's a wreck, they call us. If there's a fire, they call us. I think people take for granted sometimes outside of the 9/11 event. And I think we've become a little bit more aware, of our first responders and stuff. But I still think, we forget, you get comfortable when there's nothing really making you uncomfortable. You tend to forget. But these folks are still working. 9/11 was the pinnacle of a catastrophe and a terrible event for first responders to be in. But don't think just because that was one day they went back to hanging out, joking and smoking and whatever. They're
always working.
They're always working.
Always.
Police force, same way. EMTs. I've made mention before, my wife's a nurse. She works in the hospital, and I came from that background too. Listen, man, these paramedics and these EMTs, and I've said it before, and I'll make this statement again. For the level of work and the harm's way paramedics and EMTs put themselves into, they should be much better compensated and much more respected than what they get sometimes.
I know sometimes even myself at night, you'll be laying in bed and you'll hear an ambulance going down the road and you're like, oh, why? I'm trying to sleep. I don't want to hear this. But then you think about they don't want to hear it either. They want to be asleep, and now they're going out to who knows what they're about to see.
Yeah.
It could be anything. It could be nothing. It could be a crazy massive event that requires all sorts of other, first responders.
Yeah.
And so then you kind of have to humble yourself back and be like, all right, I'm not mad at you. I can't be upset at that sound coming by.
Yeah, for anybody, I'm sorry I jumped up on my soapbox there for a second about the paramedics and stuff, but I really do respect paramedics and EMTs a huge amount. And I've had friends and whatever else, and like I said, uncle was a fireman. I've had some of my other family's members working in and out of law enforcement. I've had some friends from high school, in law enforcement and stuff like that, and so I respect those folks.
We see the vehicle, not the people in there.
Yeah.
And actually think of what they're having to go through so we don't have to do that.
The military always says it, we wake up and part of our job is to know that, we might die today. It's an unfortunate thing. It's a terrible thing to think about, but it is the reality of our job. I think we forget sometimes when EMTs, police officers, and firemen, they wake up every day in their own neighborhood with that same thing. Maybe it might not be from a hostile action, but buildings do collapse when firemen go in it. Domestic disputes do go wrong when police officers there. The EMTs are at both of those, paramedics and stuff are at both of those same events. So you hear people giving EMTs, police officers, firemen, whatever, a hard time and stuff. Remember, they have a hard life. They really do, and they love it. That's the thing. I've never talked to a fireman or even an EMT. All of us gripe about our jobs, but I've never had one of them just tell me, God, I hate doing this.
No, I've never. I've known a few police officers, and I think I've known like 2 or 3 different firemen, and none of them. Always, they're just like, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah. They might be like, oh, yeah, the pay's not great, and, regular smoking and joking, complaining that anybody would do at any job. But when you actually just ask them, hey, why you do this? I love it.
Yeah, I mean, as tough and relentless of a job as it is, for them to stay and keep doing it, there's something there.
Yeah.
There's something keeping them.
Yeah. You just built for it.
Yeah.
It's built for it. It was destiny. That's where you were going no matter what. So, yeah, as always, thank you to these folks. And it's not just a thank you at this point in time of the year. It's a thank you all year around if we never get a chance to say it on a regular basis, but really thank you all year round. It's kind of funny to think, but, police officers keep military people safe.
They
do. We're protecting freedoms and they're protecting us. And so, and the firemen and the EMTs and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, they're our support, and especially with National Guard, we work hand in hand with them. And
a lot of our force on the civilian side perform those duties.
Yeah.
Like half of our force are these police officers and EMTs and firefighters.
Yeah. So, we're gonna kick it on over to our guest today and hear his story. And I think it's going to be, it's going to be sad. Just from the little bit I've talked to him about it and stuff. But it's going to be amazing. It's going to show you who we really are when we have to be.
Yep.
Today we have Master Sergeant Chris Bernard, Occupational Safety Specialist from McIntyre Joint National Guard Base, as part of our Remembrance Week for 9/11. And he's here to tell us his story about where he was and what he was doing in 9/11. Now, you were already in the Guard at the time of 9/11. You were part of South Carolina?
I was part of New York. I was part of the 106 Rescue Wing out of West Hampton Beach in New York. 106 Rescue Wing is a PJ unit, so their main duty is to rescue down airmen. They also fly the C-130 for aerial refueling. But as a traditional guardsman, my full-time job is a paramedic for the Nassau County Police Department. It's the first county just east of New York City, so it's pretty busy. So I was off duty at the time that this all happened on that morning, September 11th. I was in family court, actually, just answering something, and we were going to have something dismissed or postponed, and I noticed that all the guards were kind of huddled over a radio, like they were kind of being secretive, like they were listening to a baseball game or something. So I thought it was a little odd, and I just left and wondered what they were doing, but I turned the radio on my car, and then I knew that was just when the first building was falling. So I thought, man, that's really weird. I thought about my career as a paramedic, and I thought early in my career how I had to respond to a plane crash. A 707 crashed in 1990, January 1990. Avianca Flight 52, there was about 168 people on board. Over 100 lived, so my work was cut out for me as a new paramedic. So I think that was the time that I was committing to join the Air Force. I was going on active duty. I had a delayed enlistment. I was looking at September of 1990. But getting back to that morning, it wasn't until I got home that the second tower fell, and I knew that, as we all did, that we were under a terrorist attack. As a member of the Guard, I wasn't going to just sit and listen to, wait for a recall. I lived about 20 minutes away, so I got my uniform on and headed to the base. I was a medic for them. I was a 4N medical technician. So I thought this would be a day that maybe my skills would be used, and so I headed in, tried to call my wife. She was at work. I couldn't get through. All the cell phones were tied up. All the towers were tied up. So I finally got to the base and realized they were just enacting Force Protection Condition Delta, which I'd never seen before, because I don't even think we were at Alpha at that time. So normally they would just wave you on base where they see a car sticker, and it was very light, the security. This time the gate was closed, and I had to get on and show my card and why am I here. And I finally got inside the main building. I was a member of the Honor Guard, a new member, still training, and the chief of the Honor Guard, he was also chief of personnel, and I wondered why he was armed. He had an M9. I said, this is not normal. At that time, we didn't know if our base was going to get attacked. We didn't know if this was an effort, across the spectrum of, Army, Air Force. We didn't know what was happening. So he put me to work immediately, activating recalls, seeing where our members were. Some of them worked in New York City, so we were making an effort to reach out to them, see where they were, see if they were safe, and just to find out where people were should we get the call from the Adjutant General of New York to get in there and go do what we do, rescue people. That call never came. Over the next 24 hours, we got our roll call. We found out where our people were. We didn't find anyone that was. There was a few people that we couldn't find, so we put them on a search list, and we had people looking. But ultimately, we were successful in reaching out to everyone within the 2 days. We all assumed that we'd go in there, but the first call for me to go in was September 17th or so. As a medic, one of the things that we were trained in is to recognize people who were in danger of, whether it's mental stress or something, post-traumatic stress, to evaluate them to see if they're still functional. And that was one of the first things that I did, was me and, say, 3 other airmen. We had a lead team was an officer and another medical administrator to set things up, because we worked out of Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn. So we rushed out there. We got set up in temporary housing, which we were just going to share. There was about 12 people to a small apartment. And our first job was to meet the 69th Infantry. It's part of the 42nd Infantry Division. These guys were from not Harlem, but just a few blocks north of Ground Zero, and they were the first ones to get called to do perimeter duty to make sure that no one was coming into the perimeter. And they had been there pretty much nonstop for 3 to 4 days, and so I was speaking to them squad by squad, making sure that they still had their head on their, in the game. And a few people, I think 3 soldiers I had to actually remove from the situation. One we had to send to the VA because we were concerned. I spoke to his squad leader. If he had a weapon, he may have used it on himself or somebody else. That was made clear to me. So we sent him out for emergency psychological evaluation. He was pretty banged up, as we all were. Behind me was a big window. Now we were on about the 32nd floor of I guess, an abandoned office building. It was just an area for the company to rest and sleep, sleeping bags, eat. And looking out the window, I saw the wreckage, the still smoking wreckage of the Twin Towers. I grew up on Long Island, so I used to go there as a kid. I used to look down and get dizzy looking down the 102nd floor.
Yeah.
And little ants down there. I remember vividly going there. So it was like a Greek tragedy. It just, you look and you're like this. I was incredulous at the sight of, this wreckage that was still smoldering, and what are we all doing here? And I just couldn't believe it. It really took a day or so for it all to sink in. But the days leading up to that was probably the hardest because I wanted so badly to get in there to help, but there really wasn't too many people to save at that point. They were either caught in that building or they had been removed by EMS in the city and New York, firefighters. And so what I thought we would be doing, we weren't needed for. I lived about 60 or 70 miles from Ground Zero, but from my house in eastern Long Island, I could smell the fires. The smell was so intense. It smelled like your neighbor's house was on fire. It was so close. Like there's something in the neighborhood that's burning. People were calling the fire department over and over saying, somewhere in my neighborhood there's a house fire. Yes, ma'am, it's Manhattan.
Yeah.
You're smelling. It was so unbelievable. So strong. The Highway Patrol had set up the HOV lane on the Long Island Expressway to be used only for personnel, first responders getting into and out of the city. And I remember once I first got the call to go to Fort Hamilton to show there, I got on the Long Island Expressway, got into that HOV lane as instructed by my commander, and Highway Patrol pulls me over and he stopped, he saw the uniform, he says, "Hey, sorry, we're protecting this lane, go, do what you gotta do." And first time I got pulled over and didn't get a ticket, actually. So I got into the city, we got our assignments. My assignment was to help set up a Battalion 8 station at it was Battery Park. Battery Park was very close to Engine 10, Ladder 10, which was across the street from all the debris and where the towers were. A lot of firemen died from that firehouse. And so we got situated, and again, we thought we'd be getting patients to take care of. What it turned out to be is we were taking care of the soldiers and eventually the Marines that were sent in for perimeter duty. So we would walk around and we would make sure that they were okay, make sure that they were getting what they needed. Coffee wasn't really something that was available, but we had a bunch of donations of cases of this new thing that just came out called Red Bull. So at that time, I had never had it before. So, and I'd got cases of it, and I'd hand down a backpack. Finally, we were able to we acquired a golf cart. So I was the Red Bull guy, and I'd come around and see people who were having symptoms of upper respiratory infections, or whatever. I would, give antibiotics or Tylenol, things like that. But FEMA came in a day or so after we got there, and they started distributing these particulate masks. Anyone working in the area, they realized that stuff was floating everywhere. People were coughing, and they testosterone masks, distributed. How many depends on, didn't matter whether you're military, fireman. So I wore the mask. I understand how bad these things are, and I'm not a smoker or anything, so kind of try to protect my lungs. Wearing these masks was uncomfortable, but when you're in the inner perimeter, it became really important to do that, and I would spend some of my time making sure that the soldiers were wearing their masks, and they complied. I even tried to talk to the firemen who they had their mask hanging on their chest, and they were these guys were digging for their brethren. Their firemen, they wouldn't go home. They would maybe lay down for a half hour, get up, get something to eat or something, and go right back to the rubble. I remember 2 or 3 firemen, they said, hey, dude, you got that mask, put it on. Well, they told me to not worry about that. And unfortunately, a number of those firemen got sick, and I know a police officer from the Port Authority Police, his name was Bob Nicosia. Bob and I were firefighters together, volunteer firefighters in a town called Wantagh in New York. He ended up dying about 4 or 5 years later because of cancer related to 9/11. So that was hard. You know, he's missed, and he was there digging for his friends, and just like some of the firemen, they were just so emotional. There was fist fights with New York City police and firemen because they were so, this is our area. Their emotions were going nuts, and some of the things that didn't make the news, you know, these guys were helping each other, digging through the rubble. If they found a body, all work would stop, and everyone would stand, you know, pretty much solemn, not really at attention, but focus on what's going on. They would take the remains and put it in a Stokes basket. They would drape it with an American flag, and they would remove it from the rubble, and then work would continue. The only thing that didn't stop were the cherry pickers that would move rubble from, they were basically handing it off, and another one would take it. And if they were able to recognize the remains, who they're from, sometimes you could do that from a fireman's helmet. You know, the engine company or the ladder company would be, they would ask that company to come and help get their brother out, or sometimes sister out of the rubble, and they would blast a siren and, you know, just do something to, we would all salute as they would walk past us. The next time I had an opportunity to see that was years later when I was stationed in Iraq, about 2006, where we would lose a soldier or an airman, and as they would come by, we would stand at attention, and we gave them a reverence. So 9/11, the weeks after that, I think I was there for about 3 weeks, rotating 3 shifts. I was eventually relieved by members of the New York Guard from upstate. I remember driving home after that my duty was done, and I was crying the whole way home. A 45-minute drive, and the emotions that were basically lifted off my shoulders, I was finally able to absorb it more, because I was so busy doing what I was doing, making sure that I was the best I could be. Walking around that neighborhood that I had, you know, grew up as a kid visiting, was different. There was a big smoldering mess there. The people were different. The people looked at us in uniform, and they patted us on the back, and they said, "Hey, we got your back. You guys, we're proud of you." Or we felt like rock stars, really, the way we were treating us. They would cheer for us as we came in. They would, if you were a steel worker, people were patting you on the back. Police officers, they had a level of respect from people that unfortunately has pretty much diminished to the point where it's gone the other way. It wasn't that way in 2001. I remember seeing cars in the neighborhood. They all had flags, you know, in the windows of the cars would drive by, and there was a sense of pride that I think has faded. When I did get back to my unit, I spent a lot of time doing funerals. As part of the Honor Guard, we would represent the Adjutant General's office and the Governor's office by having a flag detail pretty much right in front of the church or wherever they were having the service, and we try to be, you know, leave the family with a lasting impression of some, you know, military. It got hard for us because here's the body being taken out, the casket being taken out, and there's this man's son holding dad's helmet, you know, the fireman helmet, and you know, the bagpipes would play, and they would play as they came over, you know, leave the funeral home or the church. It would play America the Beautiful, and the FDNY's bagpipe band had this like garnet shirts. You know, they have these red tunics.
Huh.
Very unique. So it just gives you chills when you see all the reverence and all the customs that go into a line of duty death. And there was hundreds of them. Over about a 2-week period, I must have done about 21 funerals just myself, and sometimes 2 or 3 a day. We would go from one to the other, and they really tried to coordinate it so that people could make as many as they could. Back in April, just back up a little bit. In April of 2001, I got married, and just before that, St. Patrick's Day, I remember being chosen to lead the parade, the St. Patrick's Day parade in West Hampton, and I watched this little, I guess he was about 13 years old, little kid playing the bagpipes, and he was cranking. These pipes sounded great. And I got angry. I got so jealous, and I said, I want to learn these pipes. My grandfather's from Scotland. I have a little connection family-wise, and so I took up lessons. My honeymoon, I was playing the chanter and making crazy noises, and God bless my wife putting up, with me for the.
Yeah.
9/11 happened. I heard those pipes, and that drive to learn the pipes just solidified, and I wanted to do it. A year later, 9/11, 2002, I had the opportunity to play the bagpipes at Ground Zero at Battery Park, where I had been stationed for 3 weeks during a ceremony where they had the EMS Memorial Bike Ride that started in Boston and ended in Roanoke, Virginia. They stopped there. I played, and tears, and everyone was very emotional about that. And since then, I must have played a dozen or so 9/11. I still play the bagpipes now. I had the opportunity, unfortunately, well, I would say fortunately, to play for my grandfather when he passed. He was 91, and I remember him telling me, Chris, he says, I like to play the pipes at my funeral. I said, Grandpa, you tell me when this is, so I have off that day from work. He was a kidder, so.
Yeah.
But he wanted me to play Flowers of the Forest, which is a 5-minute long song. It's very difficult to play, and I thought, I could do that. Well, playing for your family member is different, and I somehow focused just like I did when I was at Ground Zero. You do your job, and when I left, when I was done playing for my grandfather, I felt all the emotion just come crushing on my shoulders, and a very similar feeling, because you feel powerless, that you can't do any more, and we all felt powerless that time. We all kind of talked about it a few weeks later, just to make sure that we were all, okay with it, and that we did. We were at war. We were getting ready to go do a mission overseas, and eventually we did. And consequently, I've been back and forth 4 times over there since then, and I'm actually going back over in January or so, for probably my last deployment. But we all felt a tangible sense, to that mission that we had. It meant a lot more. It meant like, okay, we're not just training anymore. We're going to go do something. It took it a lot more serious. So.
You mentioned when you showed up at the base that was the first time you'd seen Delta. Your personnel chief was armed and stuff. Mm-hmm. That shift in, I guess, dynamic, especially from somebody who you'd been in prior for obviously a little bit amount of time leading up to there. How does that change you as an airman to go from the situation of, like you said, not even alpha, to all of a sudden you're full tilt and a 12
seat of chaos.
Yeah,
I think it changed me more as a citizen first. I think when I finally did get in touch with the wife on the phone, I said, hey, this horrible thing happened. I got to go to the base. She says, why you? I said, this is what I trained for. This we never know this day is going to come. Today's the day it's coming, and I have an obligation. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. I'm part of a unit, and now it's time for me to be who I trained for. So my citizen airman thing kind of switched a little bit, and I felt an obligation. I wasn't going to let my unit down. I wasn't going to. They attacked my city and state, our country, of course, but I felt like nothing was going to keep me from doing my duty. And I've known people who died that day. I didn't know during that time that I just lost a number of friends. One of the people I went to high school with, his name is Stephen Siller. Stephen Siller was a fireman who just got off duty in Brooklyn, in a firehouse in Brooklyn, and he came back to his firehouse. He couldn't get through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel to get to Manhattan. He got his gear and he ran. He perished in that when the buildings fell, and that's why we have the Tunnel of Towers run. It's for Stephen Siller. So of course I had that connection, and of course the Tunnel of Towers run that comes up every September, I try to get involved with and kind of have a personal connection. But about a year or so, just a year to the day when I went to Iraq in 2006, one of my workers, he died in a roadside bombing in 2005. Jeff Weiner was in the Navy. He was a corpsman with a Marine unit, and he was killed. And I was in the same country a year later, and I had the opportunity to speak at church and just talk about him a little bit. So we all knew people that died that morning, and then that subsequently perished, in whether it was for a fight of freedom or from being sick. Unfortunately, I know people also who suffered emotionally and mentally, and either ended their own lives or went down a path of self-destruction. One of the reasons why I persevered was my connection with my church, my connection with my family, my wife, and my unit was very supportive. We were hurting, we were bleeding from that. This is a unit that lost a jumper in the movie The Perfect Storm. They lost HH-60 and they lost Rick Smith. His daughter grew up, and the last I knew, she was a master sergeant in his unit, in the 103rd Rescue Squadron. Terrific NCO. So it's kind of a family. You definitely felt that. So getting back to your question about how I felt, my sense of mission was crystal clear. I wasn't going to let anything distract me from it, and I had my family support, so I was able to focus on my mission. So.
You mentioned also on the, you're out there, obviously a high intense situation, and your go, and oddly enough, I'm prior Air Guard medical myself, so similar roots on this. So I know how it gets when you get into the heat of things. But you mentioned the breakdown, kind of on the way home type thing. Yeah. Everything kind of fell on you at one shot. When that happened, I guess I'm trying to figure out the right way to word this. Was there a sense of relief and a job well done at that point in time?
Not immediately. I think at that time I was playing tapes in my head of all the things that I accomplished when I was there, making sure that I did the right thing, making sure I gave my 100%. And I felt I had. Maybe I could have done more. I thought our teamwork was good. I was disappointed that we didn't have lives to save, because as a medic, that's what my job was. But I would think that I had an impact on those soldiers that I spoke to that first day. I know it had an impact on me because I was at a point in my career where I wasn't sure if I had purpose. I would go, once a month, and I'd do my training, and it was kind of like, is the best part of my military career behind me. My first job was air traffic control, so that was an interesting job. It's a mental job.
Yeah.
We were taught about how to recognize stress in yourself and in others, in your coworkers, and identify it. And work with it. I learned how to meditate. I learned some tricks to manage stress, and I still use those tricks today. But when I was driving home and those emotions were flooding out, I thought the best thing to do is just let it go, think about it, and then take kind of like an inventory of what I had done, what I wanted to do, and how I was going to make it a positive thing out of something negative. It took me a while to do that. And one of the things that's therapeutic is something that I'm doing now, is talking about it and expressing my, telling my story and being honest about my emotions. We all were pretty, upset about it, and I talked with my wife. I'm still involved with some of the things, and I've been to New York a couple of times, and I have not yet seen the memorial the way it is now, but I am planning on going there for Thanksgiving. I have 3 kids that are in marching band, and we're going to be going up to Philadelphia. They're going to be marching in that parade, so one of the things is to visit the 9/11 memorial, and they haven't asked me yet, but I'll bring my bagpipes just in case.
Yeah. And now, the bagpipes are an interesting thing, because that's for lack of better terms, that's a positive thing. And it's odd sometimes to think of something this tragic, creating a situation where something super positive comes out, especially at a personal level. Right. Obviously we saw what the nation did as a whole, but I think sometimes we overlook in that process of how something like this brings about a positive change in somebody, and then that's something that very much occurred in you.
Right. There's not too many instruments that elicit an emotional response. You might get it from an acoustic guitar or harmonica, but bagpipes, some people hate it. It's very loud. It has a, but some people, when they hear it, especially if they have an ethnic, attachment, whether it's Irish or Scottish, and there's even Indian heritage. When you hear it, you get emotional. You think about. There's still today. There's British infantry units that won't go into battle without a piper. They went into battle on the Falkland Islands and in the 80s, and in Desert Storm. They need to have that because their history, it's intertwined with that. And World War II, there were British prisoners of war that somehow got pieces together, and they made their own bagpipes because just for the emotional support it gave their soldiers. And so I'm sure that I've made people, at least when they listen to playing, and they think about the situations, they think about the emotions, and they think about the people who are gone. I do. I think about it. Sometimes I have to put it out of my mind when I'm playing, because it's a difficult instrument to play. I kid around when people ask me. I said, I just learned it. You get a tape at the library in one weekend. You got it.
Yeah, yeah.
My 13-year-old just asked me last week to start giving him lessons. I wouldn't have started him unless he's shown me. He plays about 7 instruments. He was first chair in the bassoon for the state last year as a 8th grader, and this is his first year as a 9th grader. So things are going to get harder, but he's very musically inclined, so he may carry that torch when I put them down. So be a little history, a little family history.
Yeah. The other part that I find interesting about that is because, like you said, you had an interest beforehand, but this 9/11 obviously solidified it. So, every time you play, people might not realize it if they don't know your story, but I mean, it really is a remembrance of it every time you hit the bagpipes, basically, type thing. And that's unique. I mean, that's awesome. And I think it just brings it more back down. Like I said, whenever you have something like this as a national level, you tend to look at it as a national level event. And we tend to forget that individual person. And I'm sure you weren't the only one, but there's a whole group out there that...
all the small personal connections that still exist. And it's like you're still remembering, honoring, and serving that moment to this day.
I'm glad that I do have that. I left New York about 5 years ago. I retired from the police department as a paramedic, and I was done with snow, first of all. But
You came to a good place for that.
Yeah, I wanted to be where people are nicer to each other, where people were still growing, the politics are more in line with what I was doing, and I found a unit at McIntyre. But when I got here and I started working as a paramedic for Lexington EMS, I saw a 9/11 memorial in in the city of Lexington, and I thought they really have a connection. I was so surprised, and that was on the first day, just looking, like interviewing for the job. And a few minutes after that, I think I pulled into a Wendy's or a restaurant like that, and this gentleman was walking by, and he was waving to me like he knew me, like I owed him money or something. And he was just saying, "Hey."
Yeah.
That would never happen in Long Island. And finally started working with Lexington EMS, and I remember Chief Brian Hood of EMS. We were sharing a meal for some training, and we all bowed our heads and prayed together. Again, that's not something that happens where I came from. And I remember calling my wife on the phone. I said, I really found a place that we can bring up our family, our kids. And I'm so happy. I love our church. I love the library, the school district. So I'm happy where I am, and I'm happy continuing to do this job. I'm just about to finish 23 years in the Guard. So
Wow.
as long as
Congratulations.
I can keep being miserable.
Yeah. But, well, Master Sergeant, we appreciate you taking time out today, and definitely appreciate you sharing this story with us.
It's my honor and privilege.
Yeah, thank you. I haven't met you before now to say thank you, but thank you for what you did. And anytime you are welcome back on this podcast, and we hope great things for you in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm glad Master Sergeant Menard was able to stop by and talk with us, and he had like I told y'all beforehand, he had a very unique perspective. Definitely different than the young lady we spoke with yesterday, who had, she wasn't even in the military yet and whatever. He was there.
Yeah.
He was there.
It's like we were talking about, like some people saw it happen and then joined the Army. Some people saw it flip while they were in it, and he was one of those people who was doing his normal day-to-day job, and then everything just changed.
Yeah, and he stayed in after it too.
Yeah.
Once again, we go back to kind of what we said before about those being defining moments in people's lives. Not to say that it makes anybody a lesser person, but there was a lot of people, at the point in time when that event happened, said, I can't, I'm done. I'm out, and nothing wrong with that. I'm not dogging anybody out. It's just those are the choices, and here was an individual that said, nope, I'm in for the long run. He's done multiple deployments and things since then.
And he saw some of the hardest stuff from what he was saying. I mean, just the emotion attached with his initial response to that, and then to stay in.
Yeah, and once again, how we were talking just kind of before we got to his interview about how, police and stuff take care of soldiers and airmen. Here was a situation where, he was taking care of first responders and soldiers and airmen and, doing all these health and wellness type checks and just making sure, hey, guys, take that break, And like he said, it was hard for him to get them to. They wouldn't, and
he had to try to carry their burdens so they could keep doing their job as well. I mean, that's a lot of weight to hold on somebody.
Oh yeah, and like he said, it wasn't until he started heading home that he broke that little bit, and that goes back to kind of what we were talking about with first responders and stuff. They have some switch that they flip. Mm-hmm. And it's go time. I'm not taking that break. I'm not stopping now. I'll figure out later when I need to rest and things like that. So, once again, kudos, thank you. Y'all are awesome. All the words of acclaim and show
that can be put out there
to y'all. Thank y'all. Thank you. And that includes the soldier, airmen, all the other military members. Like I said, this is a remembrance not only of the people that were there and where they were in their lives at that point in time, but also all the lives that event has touched from here on around the world. So make sure you tune in. We got 2 more special episodes for the podcast this week. We are going to skip 9/11 because that is the day of remembrance, and we're not going to.
Everyone has
their own way of, and we're going to allow. We want to make that possible. We don't want to have to throw something out there for y'all. But we'll be coming back to it. I believe that Thursday and Friday of this week with 2 more podcasts. So make sure we'll have different people in for those and different perspectives again around the 9/11 event. So once again, I'm Specialist David Erskine.
I'm Captain Cody Jensen.
And we'll catch you in the next episode.